How do you go from earning minimum wage as a player and coach in England, being rejected by minor leagues and looking for a job as an accountant, to winning the NBA championship in your first year, achieving Coach of the Year in your second, and earning over $50 million? Nick Nurse has gone from locker rooms who say, "Who the hell is this guy?" when he enters, to being the face of teams that win. Yes, he has an impressive start to his head coaching career in the NBA, but for almost 3 decades, he was a coach that nobody wanted. So, how did he completely change his life and make NBA history? Well, to see Nick Nurse's rise, we have to go back to when a 23-year-old college player decided to chase his dream no matter what. In 1990, a young accounting graduate and three-point shooting leader from the University of Iowa took his first professional job with the Derby Rams in England's obscure British Basketball League, or BBL. This league was a far cry from the prestige and glamour of college ball or the NBA, obviously, but it provided the perfect training ground for an ambitious coach looking to stay connected to basketball a little while longer before he went to find a job and live his life. Nurse's time in the BBL was a crash course in coaching adaptability. The league's structure, with multiple competitions, including 2 league cups, a regular season title, and a separate playoff tournament, forced Nurse to constantly adjust his strategies, all while playing at the same time. And he was also too young to even drive the team bus. Despite only 2 practices a week, this experience would prove invaluable in his future NBA career, where his ability to think outside the box would propel him in ways he never imagined. But for now, he was far away from home. The contrast between coaching in England and the NBA could not have been larger. While NBA coaches had state-of-the-art facilities and massive budgets, so did college. Nurse had to make do with extremely limited resources, while only earning $300 a week. This forced him to be creative in every game he played and every team he coached, traits that would define his coaching style for years to come. And that's because he would go back to be an assistant coach for a few years in the US, but he really wanted to get that head coaching experience. Ultimate goal was just to stay connected to basketball for as long as possible and to figure out, hey, maybe this coaching thing could lead somewhere. However, it didn't, and now he'd have to go back to England if he wanted to be a head coach. Nurse, however, thrived in the BBL, at one point having a 276-win, 103-loss record during one 4-year stretch, showcasing his early attraction to winning, and winning a lot. His success didn't go unnoticed, but it wasn't in North America, it was in the BBL, and he won Coach of the Year in 2000 as well as 2004. These awards, this success, were early indicators of someone who understood coaching and understood basketball. But what does it matter if no one knows who you are, and no one near the NBA wants to give you a job because, again, this was the British Basketball League, filled with amateurs and semi-pros. But he had to try absolutely anything to win his game.
You know, there was one team over there that had this point guard that just absolutely controlled the game, like every game. He was like this 38-year-old dude, and he just was awesome, right? And I just decided, you know what? We're just never going to let him bring the ball up the floor. And we're just never going to let him just run at the game. Whatever else happens, I'm willing to live with, things like that you would just try.
However, this basically was the ultimate scientific testing pot for coaching theories. He also experimented with unconventional practice techniques, creating competitive environments that pushed his players to improve. When they're all just doing this for the passion or just to have a bit of fun, there's not always a desire to, become the best you can be. So one such technique involved putting money on the line. Literally. The free throw line to be specific. But he also used money in shooting competitions, adding an extra engagement and a little bit of fun to his practice sessions. Nurse's time in the BBL wasn't just about winning games and championships like he did in '96 and 2000. It was a critical period of self-discovery. As he put it, he was just searching for his coaching identity. Imagine that everything you try to do does not get you noticed. Nobody wants to hire you in any of the jobs that you're applying for, but Nurse was trying to make it to the NBA. So he knew once more he had to step it up. One of the most unique moments in his British basketball experience came in 2006 when he convinced one Dennis Rodman to play 3 league games for the Brighton Bears, who he was coaching at the time, and he would coach different teams almost every year at this point. This kind of strong push would signal the evolution of Nurse as a coach, as a person, and as a businessman. He would have to learn to wear many hats to get to where he wanted to be. Now, while the Rodman experiment didn't really amount to anything other than a few show appearances, Nurse would begin to see that he had to make a move at some point. His time in the BBL also took him all over Europe, including coaching in Belgium for a year, as well as doing a camp over in Italy with the Benetton Treviso team, which is, by the way, where Mike D'Antoni coached and learned his craft in the early 90s.
20 years of head coaching experience put me in a lot of situations. I'd seen a lot of basketball.
Those opportunities give you a chance to sort of develop that different way of thinking.
Yeah, well, it develops on you. You almost get forced out of the box. You know what I mean? It's not like you're sitting here saying, I'm going to be a creative outside the box thinker. I mean,
Nurse made these realizations. He was still very far from being an NBA coach. He knew after over 10 years abroad, it was time to take his experience and really push for a chance. Would his success across all of these teams and countries be enough to break through in the NBA? Or would Nick have to be creative in a different sort of environment in order to make his goal of an NBA head coaching job a reality? While most aspiring NBA coaches chase prestigious assistants jobs, mostly because they were either players or actually coached in college or had some connection to the NBA in a previous life, Nick Nurse chose a different path because he was none of those things. And like his coaching in England, this would test every ounce of his creativity and adaptability. The D-League, as it was known back then, now the G-League, was the NBA's official minor league and became Nurse's entry point. But he was still not wanted, and he still had no name. He couldn't even get a job. The best way forward here is to accept that now you have to take control. You have to consider an out-of-the-box approach to getting through the G League and NBA, or to get you to consider to subscribing for more incredible NBA stories on the GOAT Authority. And after all of this, not every story is destined to be successful. But given the hardships to get into coaching, had he thought about quitting at this stage?
Yeah, a couple times. So I decided I better start coaching a little harder and studying a little more to become a successful coach, because I knew that's what I really loved and wanted to do.
And it all led him back home to Iowa. So Nurse, in a parking lot, called the owner of the new stadium that had just been completed. He asked if they wanted an NBA D-League team. He said, sure, we'd love one. So he called the D-League office and eventually got through to the top, and they said, yeah, Iowa sounds like a great place for an expansion team for the D-League. They worked together to find an ownership group, and boom, the Iowa Energy were born.
You know, I was reading that you were selling tickets, you were literally getting jerseys, like you were doing it all.
A lot of people that go through the minor leagues or coach in the backwaters, whether it's hockey or basketball or football, whatever you're popping the popcorn and selling tickets and writing articles for the program and all kinds of things, but you just want to see it succeed.
Now, you would think someone with this amount of raw basketball experience, and more diverse than a lot of coaches will ever see, would at least warrant interviews for NBA D-League jobs. But sadly, this was not the case for Nurse, neither for the main NBA either. So he made his own luck. Nick's journey through the G-League was no short stint. He knew that in order to get noticed by the NBA, he had to succeed in the D-League. Most importantly, he was the head coach, and he would spend 6 seasons in that position, a period that would prove crucial in shaping his coaching philosophy further and finally beginning to make a name for himself because he was directly connected to the NBA professional space. During this time, Nurse had a staggering 23 players called up to the NBA, which revealed he had something that every team loves: an ability to develop talent and prepare players for the next level. But that really wasn't his focus. He was good at it because he had to be, and that's where his experience in the BBL and across Europe had taken him, but he was there to win. And when he did, like everywhere he'd been in his career. In the 2010-2011 season, Nurse led the Iowa Energy to a league-best 37-13 record. This earned him the Coach of the Year award, yet another one, and would just be the beginning of his D-League success story. The following year, Nurse guided the Energy to the D-League championship. His innovative approach to the game was already now turning heads, especially on offense, but Nurse wasn't done yet, because he'd only turned their heads, not had them give him an opportunity to actually go to the NBA. So in the 2012-2013 season, Nurse took on a new challenge with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers. That's a mouthful. Once again, he led his team to an impressive 35-15 record, and another D-League championship. This made him one of only 2 coaches in that league's history to win multiple titles with different teams. And remember, these players are getting called up into the NBA, they're swapping over all the time. So this run of success solidified Nurse's reputation as a coach who could consistently produce results regardless of the talent at his disposal. For the past 23 years, since 1990, every locker room Nurse had walked into as the coach, because he swapped teams almost annually at this point, had the reaction of, who the hell is this guy? What set him apart in the D-League was his willingness to experiment and innovate while earning the trust of whatever players he had in the locker room. The Vipers in particular gave Nurse significant creative freedom to test his unconventional strategies, and he took full advantage of this opportunity, using the D-League as a proving ground for ideas that would later dominate the NBA. This environment was really built for him to thrive because of his experience in the BBL. But now he was not just loading X's and O's, but he was loading team dynamics. And no offense to the British Basketball League, but he definitely had a lot more talent to work with. He took every advantage of every opportunity to improve himself as a coach throughout these years. And as Nurse's reputation grew in the D-League, so did whispers around the NBA. Not just turning heads now, whispers. This was a coach who was consistently winning championships and developing NBA-ready talent. But where did he come from? Who was this coach that no one had heard of? People were still asking this question because Nurse didn't come from any coaching tree. Many coaches you know today were trained by other greats or had direct experience. Popovich worked under Larry Brown and Don Nelson. Steve Kerr played under both Jackson and Popovich. Chuck Daly got his big break as an assistant for Billy Cunningham, the second highest win rate coach of all time behind Phil Jackson. Nurse had none of this prestige, none of these connections. He had bet on himself in 1990. He had bet on himself in 2007 with the D-League. He had believed that all his hard work would pay off someday. And hey, guess what? It would, but it would not give him the head coaching job in the NBA he had always wanted because he was just a journeyman coach who had never resided in one team too long to really develop a long-term impact. But in 2013, after his second D-League championship, the Toronto Raptors made a move that had many scratching their heads. Well, as much as teams scratch their heads about assistants, but they promoted Nick Nurse to an assistant. At the time, no one expected such an unassuming coach would create such a balanced and powerful team. Nurse has always said he was just trying to work at his craft throughout his career, and he did. This relentless pursuit of knowledge and improvement would become Nurse's hallmark as an assistant with the Raptors. His impact would be immediate and without hesitation. Nurse's creative schemes and ability to maximize player strengths transformed Toronto into an offensive powerhouse. Slowly, as the years went by and the pieces fell into place, the vision became more and more realized. By the 2017-2018 season, the Raptors' firepower was largely attributed to Nurse's innovative approach. So much so that they had the second highest offensive rating ahead of the Kevin Durant and Steph Curry Warriors, but behind the legendary D'Antoni Harden Rockets. Think about what that means for scoring, pace, and efficiency. Oh, by the way, they also had the 5th best defensive rating. So Dwayne Casey as the head coach and Nick Nurse as the assistant formed a formidable team, and the Raptors were proving to be something that could win titles. But even as this happened, Nurse remained largely unknown outside of basketball circles. He wasn't a big name, he wasn't a former star, but his impact on individual players was impressive. He had a knack for identifying areas where they could improve, he developed targeted strategies that helped them succeed, and when you spend your life developing talent of all ages and all experience, you tend to learn how to quickly assess and maximize a player's ability. Whether it was tweaking a jump shot or refining a post move, Nick's attention to detail helped elevate the games of Toronto's players. And no one can deny that these results were great, as the Raptors consistently ranked among the league's top improving teams for both offense and defense, getting better records every year, but faltering in the playoffs. The reason for this? LeBronto. LeBron James at his absolute peak for the Cavaliers was destroying them every year in the playoffs until they had a 10th loss in a row versus him in the 2018 playoffs. They were swept as the number 1 seed, and honestly, Toronto Raptors as an organization were tired of this. They fired the head coach Dwayne Casey, but Nurse was not the one they wanted to replace him. His reputation had grown, and it became clear that he was destined for more than just an assistant role, but not yet. He had only been in the NBA for 5 years at his age. His skill set showed that he was someone that might get a head coaching position. The only question was when and where he would get this opportunity. Still a coach that nobody wanted. However, as the 2018 offseason approached, the Toronto Raptors faced a critical decision that would make or break their championship aspirations. LeBron had basically made the Raptors seem like his G League team, and it was clear something needed to change. But who could have predicted that they'd gamble everything on the NBA's most unlikely head coaching candidate? Yes, they interviewed the Hawks coach, Mike Budenholzer, and he would take the job, just wouldn't be for the Raptors. It would be for the Bucks, where he'd dominate and win in his own time frame. Instead, they fell back on another unlikely candidate, Jerry Stackhouse, a popular former player who was the head coach of the Raptors G League team the year prior. Both of these individuals had better name recognition and experience within the NBA. Nurse's career had been about surprises and weird things happening. And guess what? The Raptors decided to give him a shot. And it is unknown whether Nurse was more or less a default choice after Budenholzer went to the Bucks, but no one else stood out to them as a huge swing, and Nurse was familiar with the offense, the team, and the organization. While he had proven himself as an assistant coach for the Raptors, the idea of handing him the reins of a potential contender seemed risky at best. They were primed for winning right now. After all, this was a man with zero NBA head coaching experience. Could he really transform a playoff disappointment into a title contender? How could a coach that nobody wanted squeeze more out of the Raptors than the 2008 year where they set franchise records and still got swept in the playoffs? Well, Raptors president Masai Ujiri wasn't afraid to take that chance, because as it turns out, he was the only person in the NBA who did actually kinda know who Nick Nurse was. As a player in England during the mid-90s, Ujiri had seen Nurse on the sidelines against him. He said his teams were tough, and there was always something about the Birmingham team that he was coaching at the time that was different from the whole league. So even though Nurse was not the primary candidate, who he had been for the Raptors over the past 5 years and who he had been in the 90s would lead to Ujiri calling him everything you want in a candidate. Someone who thinks about the game differently. Being innovative is who Nick is. You can tell he's a tactician who really thinks about the game. Well, with that in mind, Nick Nurse was now the head coach, but he still knew he needed more defensive creativity and efficiency to go with his high-powered offense, so he can try to be ready for more things in the playoffs. Nick Nurse wouldn't know it at the time, but this statement would truly set the foundation for his entire career. And he also knew the goal from day one, to show the league that the coach nobody wanted for 3 decades could destroy them. Big Nick Nurse has famously said that he believes only part of his job, 15%, is actually these tactical X's and O's. And his willingness to try unconventional strategies would earn the players' respect. A key upcoming star in Pascal Siakam would actually note, he's willing to try different things. A lot of coaches aren't. Last year I wasn't handling the ball. This year, Nick made it a priority. I'm not sure a lot of other coaches would give me that freedom or that trust. This openness to innovation created an environment where the players felt empowered to expand their games and take risks as well. Very important in a team that's done well in the regular season but struggled in the playoffs. You want to remove that mental restriction as soon as possible. And another feature, shall we say, of Nurse's coaching style was his brutal honesty. While some coaches might sugarcoat things, Nurse believed in direct communication. Very direct. His team knew what he wanted from them and what he expected from them. Kyle Lowry, the Raptors' all-star point guard, described it perfectly. He's a very laid-back coach, very chill, until you don't play hard. Now, given Nurse had implemented the Raptors' potent offense the previous season, you'd think he was primed for the start of the 2018-2019 season. It would be his first ever head coaching job, but it would be a familiar team with a familiar organization, something he had not had for most of his career. Well, all of his career. However, none of this would be true. His first significant test would come in the summer of 2018, when the Raptors made a franchise-altering move. They traded away beloved star DeMar DeRozan and acquired Kawhi Leonard, completely changing the team's dynamics. Integrating a superstar of Leonard's skill while maintaining team chemistry would be a challenge for any coach, let alone a rookie whose locker room had just drastically shifted. But Nurse was up to it. It's what his entire career was about up until this point. He recognized the need to build trust with Leonard quickly, understanding that the star player's buy-in would be crucial to the team's success. At the same time, Nurse had to keep the rest of the roster engaged and motivated, ensuring that everyone understood their role in this new-look Raptors team, and to remember their ultimate dream. Nurse wouldn't have to wait long for Kawhi's buy-in.
Like, he got traded to Toronto. I'm not sure he was like, whoa, what happened here? How'd I end up here? And I'm meeting with him, and it was super cool. We were kind of going through some stuff on the board, and he said, I'm going to do it for 1 year. After that, he goes, I'm not sure what's going to happen, right? But for 1 year, I'm going to play 100%, and I'm going to play to win the title. And I was kind of like, that's a pretty good deal. Let's start with that.
Would the new coach's strategies and lifelong journey give him everything he needed to have success? Would this opportunity allow him to rewrite his story or set him up for a different coaching future? Well, the Raptors' decision, even if not their first choice, proved to be the right one. The regular season had shown Nurse's ability to build long-term on his ideas, maximize his roster's potential, although they had a whole career for that, and yet still bring in his unique tactics and motivation. Under his guidance, the Raptors had secured the second seed in the Eastern Conference with a 58-win, 24-loss record, and with a very powerful and balanced team ranking both 5th in offensive and defensive rating. This is usually a unique achievement that only few of the greatest coaches manage, and he'd done it in his first year. And for the offense, all of his experimentation was the reason. It would use a lot of motion and misdirection by having the ball go one direction and then the other, always keeping the defense thinking. Very frequently, this would allow someone to be open. But he would also ensure that his players weren't standing around. Every time the ball was passed, someone was cutting to the basket or setting a screen, creating easy scoring chances. He would also do things where there was a pick and roll, but he'd have someone on the baseline ready to catch a pass and shoot. For Kawhi Leonard, this was easy. And additionally, players like Danny Green would take advantage of all of this movement and simply cut from one corner to the next, resulting in a lot of great open looks. All these tweaks and motions made the Raptors offense tough to guard, but he had one secret card up his sleeve as well. While only a fan in the 1990s, Nurse's relationship with legendary coach Phil Jackson had provided valuable insights on his season. A connection from the Raptors organization set up the meeting on the first day he was a coach. A 3-day retreat later, Jackson would be along for the ride to provide help and advice. Nurse knew he'd need every trick in the playbook to succeed, and leaning on the experience of the greatest coach of all time is not a bad thing to have. Especially seeing as his originally inspired triangle offense, in his words, looked like a spaced out square. Beyond the actual team tactics, one of Nurse's key strategies during the season involved managing Kawhi Leonard's workload. Recognizing Leonard's importance to the championship dreams, in that he was the most important part, Nurse implemented a load management plan, carefully monitoring Leonard's minutes and resting him strategically throughout the season to help his degenerative knee disorder. This approach, while controversial at times, ensured Leonard was fresh for the playoffs. Throughout every action he did, he had the trust of his team. He also shocked them. He's very good at adapting, Marc Gasol said. Some of the things he does are eye-popping. He showed me some rebounding techniques that were really interesting. With the Raptors following this lead, they entered the postseason as a well-oiled machine. Nurse had crafted a dynamic team capable of matching up against any opponent, but as the first round against the Orlando Magic began, Nurse would be tested immediately. In a stunning turn of events, the Magic shocked the Raptors in Game 1, winning 104-101. You can imagine everyone in Toronto and the entire Raptors organization getting ready to deal with the same things they dealt with the previous couple of seasons, but that's why Nurse was hired. To avoid these playoff meltdowns with a talented team, it was time for Nurse to prove that he was ready for the playoff spotlight. Could his true coaching talent and all the work he'd put into his career deliver now? Following the Game 1 defeat, Nurse's frustration boiled over. He delivered a blistering film session, his voice heard by everyone in the facility as he challenged his team. Pascal Siakam warned his teammates about Nurse's mood before the session, noting he was really upset and very tense. I had 17 clips I was going to show, Nurse said. I think I stopped at 1. They thought they understood how hard we needed to play because it was the playoffs. Apparently, they didn't. Nurse's passionate response and the way he delivered those kinds of comments ignited a fire under the Raptors. They responded by winning 4 straight games, closing out the series and setting the tone for their playoff run. Something you should be doing if you're the second seed, but now that it was done, it was clear that Nurse wasn't going to let this team coast on their regular season success and give up and not play hard if they struggled in the playoffs. Every game, every possession mattered. The next opponent, the Philadelphia 76ers, only in the process of a young team growing dangerous with Embiid, Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons, and a somehow peaking JJ Redick. Nurse knew he couldn't rely on a single game plan to overcome such a talented roster, even if the Raptors were by far a better team in the regular season. Instead, he embraced a philosophy of constant adjustment, tweaking his strategies from game to game and even quarter to quarter. Many established coaches cannot do these sorts of things. It was an extremely tight series, however, and Nurse would have a trial by fire for his ability to motivate, adjust, and fight. This would work on Embiid by slowing him down greatly. He does it to himself also, but the Sixers were a deep team. And sadly, despite many attempting to question why he did certain tactics, have certain timeouts, or, pull his starters out of the game in Game 6 with more than enough time left to come back, this was all part of his unique motivational tactics. One article said what Nurse was actually doing was getting anyone else not named Kawhi their rhythm back, make them feel good by seeing a few shots go in heading into Game 7. And yes, it would come down to a decisive Game 7. The team would play with more energy, but it would still require some magic. He put the ball in Kawhi Leonard's hands, trusting his star to deliver. The result? One of the most iconic moments in NBA history.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
With the Sixers and Embiid having generational trauma from that shot, the challenges Nurse would face would only get more intense and more difficult. Next up in the Eastern Conference Finals, the top-seeded Milwaukee Bucks, led by Giannis, yes, but also by Coach Budenholzer, who was first up for the Raptors job. The Bucks had dominated the regular season and looked unstoppable. Initially, Nurse and the Raptors struggled to contain Giannis, falling behind 0-2 in the series. And let's be honest, everyone was failing to contain him then. It was clear that a dramatic shift in strategy was needed. Kawhi said the adjustment is, I'm guarding Giannis, and then walked out of the locker room. Nick Nurse knew to trust his team and his star, but realized it would probably take more than that. His answer? The wall. Kawhi Leonard took the primary assignment, but every time Giannis drove, he ran into bodies. Marc Gasol standing tall, Pascal Siakam and Kyle Lowry swarming from the wings, Fred VanVleet digging in from the weak side. The Raptors didn't just guard him, they smothered him. Giannis' drives turned into tough kickouts, his post-ups into rush decisions, his dominance vanished, at least by his standards. The Raptors stormed back to win 4 straight games, advancing to the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history. Coaches and stars usually take years to work together to figure out how to win. Nurse's entire career of swapping teams, players, and even countries made this an easy job. He also only had 1 year with Kawhi. Yeah, he was playing better than anybody else in the league, but a coach has to lead them and give them the strategy and the motivation, which he would need to make sure he was at the top of his game for, because the next target, the dynasty of the Golden State Warriors and the legend of Stephen Curry. Could Nurse do what no one else would have ever expected from him? Would he have a genius tactic that could contain legends and prove he was a coach deserving of not only just being in the NBA, but being one of the best coaches in the league? Kevin Durant was injured, but Curry, Draymond Green, and Thompson had all won a title in 2015. They knew how to win. As the Raptors prepared to face the Golden State Warriors in the finals, Nick Nurse knew he'd need to pull out all the stops to overcome the 2-time defending champions. A three-peat denial was on the line, all the rage these days. His solution? A defensive strategy so unconventional that it would make Steph Curry and Steve Kerr and a lot of people laugh at him. Enter the box-and-one defense. In a crucial moment during Game 2, Nurse deployed this rarely seen defensive alignment, assigning one defender to shadow Steph Curry while the other 4 formed a box zone. This is fantastic when you have one dominant player, but tough in the NBA when there are so many great players. The strategy was so unexpected that Curry himself referred to it as janky. Lowry was surprised and called it innovative. Kawhi said he is experimental, and a lot of times what he draws up on the board works. And for Kawhi, that's basically the highest form of praise you can have. Nurse was here to win. But, janky or not, the strategy worked. The box-and-one disrupted the Warriors' offensive flow, particularly after Thompson had to leave the game in Game 2. And yes, the Raptors would lose, but they held the Warriors without scoring for 5 straight minutes and managed to almost come back. And in long finals, you need these signals. During the series, they would use it in moments where Curry was the only real threat in order to lock down the Warriors and create runs for the Raptors. It was the weapon, the championship weapon perhaps. After winning Game 3, they would use it yet again in Game 4, and along with Kawhi Leonard's masterclass winning the Raptors from 11 points down to dominate the game, especially with the 17-point third quarter, they would take a 3-1 series lead, and after losing Game 5 in a close finish, Nurse's secret trick defense would show itself again in Game 6. As these finals and playoffs had progressed, it became clear that Nurse's coaching was making a significant difference. His ability to adapt on the fly, implement unconventional strategies, and keep his team focused under such immense pressure was pushing the Raptors closer to their first championship. In the Game 6, they would succeed. Another tight battle, but victory would belong to Nurse and his team on the way to Toronto's first championship. His willingness to try such a weird strategy, his willingness to keep being innovative throughout the season, but especially on the NBA's biggest stage, said everything there is about his coach's ego that is required in order to be a coach, but also, as always, his creativity.
Any coach at this league has to have a healthy ego to operate a locker room.
You know, the very first year I was here as an assistant, and this is exactly what you're talking about. And what you just said, you feel that like, you know, we're sitting here in our film room, and when you walk in and it's your scout as an assistant for the first time, and these guys are sitting there, and you're right. They're not only they're looking for any reason to pick you apart. You know, you misspell one word on the edit, or you know how to spell, you know, anything, and you just have to, when you go up there to put up that game plan and tell them how to guard the personnel, it's got to be solid.
The confetti had barely settled when Nick Nurse faced his next challenge, proving the Raptors weren't just a one-hit wonder. There was no resting on the success, and that's it. Nurse had worked too hard to reach this point to stop now. Kawhi Leonard would leave for the Clippers, but Nurse didn't flinch. Instead, he doubled down on what made him great: adaptability, creativity, and trust in his players. Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet stepped up, and Toronto kept rolling, finishing the next season with a 53-19 win record, and this would earn Nurse Coach of the Year honors. Though they would fall short in the playoffs, it would be a competitive Game 7 loss to the Celtics, and yes, they would use his box-and-one defense again. Nevertheless, the coach that no one wanted had achieved more than anyone ever expected, and more than any coaches do. He had changed NBA history and stopped a three-peat from the Warriors. Now, he seeks to achieve even more greatness with the 76ers and beyond, as this squad faces immense challenges of their own. Not all great coaches get to win championships, but some do change basketball forever while going on to win more games than anyone else. Click to learn how Don Nelson is the reason the Warriors won titles in the first place.